Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into a land of fractured hills and broken cities, a place where the stones still remember the thunder of Roman legions, but the air is filled with the uneasy quiet of uncertainty. You find yourself walking across a dusty road outside the ruined walls of a once proud city, the smell of pine and the distant brine of the Adriatic drifting together in the cool air. Shadows lengthen across the stones, and you can almost hear the hush of voices, Romans whispering in fear, Goths murmuring in hope as the figure of a tall, steady leader begins to emerge on the horizon. This is the story of Theodoric, the Gothic king who will come to rule Italy with a strange mixture of gentleness and steel. So take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it right now for you? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly, step by step, through the Italy of the late 5th century. Rome has fallen not in one single shattering moment, but in a long, drawn-out sigh that left the peninsula dotted with crumbling aqueducts and weary people. The Western Roman Empire is gone, dissolved in war and debt, and in its place local rulers and warlords jostle for power like restless shadows. Among them stands Odoacer, the Germanic soldier, who once toppled the last boy emperor, Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer rules as king, but his grip is tenuous, his authority a thin layer stretched over a land still aching from centuries of empire. You pause at the thought what it must have felt like to be a Roman farmer in those days, staring at the horizon with fear of who might come next. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans saw Odoacer as a tyrant or simply as a necessary evil, the hand that at least kept the fields from burning. But what they all agree on is that Italy was fragile, fractured, and waiting for someone stronger, someone more decisive, to gather it into something resembling peace. That someone is Theodoric, though he is not yet here. For now you can only sense his approach, like the faint echo of hoofbeats far away. He comes not from the heart of Rome, but from the outer world, from the Ostrogoths, his people who roamed the steppes and forests, toughened by hunger and sharpened by war. It might seem strange that a Gothic king would one day claim the mantle of Rome, but here, standing in the twilight of empire, stranger things become possible. You take another step, feeling the crunch of gravel beneath your feet. Around you, the landscape is both broken and enduring. Olive trees cling stubbornly to hillsides, their roots wrapped around rocks older than empires. A ruined amphitheatre lies ahead, its arches still proud but gnawed by weeds. Inside you imagine children chasing one another through corridors once filled with cheering crowds. History lingers here, but it is quiet history, like the faint scent of smoke after a fire. Theodoric's arrival will not be sudden. His march into Italy is the climax of a long negotiation between worlds, the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople and the restless Gothic tribes pressing at its borders. The Eastern Emperor Zeno, weary of Odoacer's independence, invites Theodoric to settle the matter for him. You imagine parchment crackling in the emperor's hand, words written in careful ink, promising land authority legitimacy if only this Gothic leader can remove Odoacer from his throne. And so the road you walk tonight is more than stone and dust. It is a path paved by politics as much as steel. The Romans, masters of law and bureaucracy, are not gone entirely. Their empire still breathes in the east, and their habit of turning enemies into tools has not disappeared either. Theodoric will become that tool, though with time he will become something far greater, a king who for a brief, shining moment seems to bridge two worlds. You lean against a crumbling wall, breathing in the coolness of night. The lamps of a small village flicker in the valley below, and you picture weary peasants gathering around tables, breaking bread, whispering prayers to saints or to gods half forgotten. Theodoric's story will matter to them even if they never meet him. His rule will shape their daily bread, the taxes they pay, the safety of their children. And yet if you ask them now on this night of waiting who Theodoric was, most would shrug. He is still just a rumor. But rumors have weight. You imagine a merchant returning from the coast, speaking of tall riders with fur cloaks and braided hair, their eyes set westward. You imagine a Roman senator in Ravenna nervously tracing lines on a map, wondering whether to flee or to hope. You imagine Theodoric himself riding through the night, hearing the creak of saddles and the low murmur of men who follow him faithfully. The story you are about to live through is not only one of battles and crowns. It is also a story of compromise, of delicate balances between Roman tradition and Gothic strength, between Christian divisions and political necessity. It is a story of mosaics glimmering in half-light, of libraries kept safe when so much else was burning, of fields sown under watchful eyes. And yes, it is also a story of suspicion and tragedy, of friendships soured and scholars imprisoned, of faith tested in the final years of a king's life. For now, though, you walk forward into this Italy that is waiting for a Gothic king whose quiet rule will be remembered not in thunder and lightning, but in the softer glow of mosaics, in the hum of restored aqueduct, in the stillness of a mausoleum built for eternity. You follow the path back in time, not to Italy's ruins, but eastward toward the shining marble streets of Constantinople. Here, among the domes and golden mosaics, a young boy is raised far from his Gothic homeland. That boy is Theodoric. His story begins not in his tribe's campfires, but as a hostage, though the word feels sharper than the reality he grew into. Taken to the Eastern Roman court at the age of about 8, he was both a guest and a guarantee. His father, Theodemir, a Gothic king, had agreed to peace with Emperor Leo, and as a pledge of trust the child Theodoric lived under the watchful eyes of Roman tutors. You can picture him wandering the polished corridors of the imperial palace, a tall, curious boy with long hair and sharp eyes. He learns to ride, to read the flow of battle maps, to sense when men smile with their lips, but hide plans behind their teeth. Historians still argue whether he was educated in the classical Roman sense, whether he truly read Latin literature, or whether he remained illiterate, preferring to rule through speech and memory. What is certain is that he breathed in the rhythms of Roman life, the order of its rituals, the weight of its ceremonies, the sheer presence of an empire that, though divided, still dazzled the imagination. You pause for a moment and imagine yourself as Theodoric, a young Goth among the world's most powerful court. There is silk in the market, spices drifting through the air, priests chanting in cathedrals where gold leaf glitters under lamplight. Theodoric is both insider and outsider, welcomed at banquets, yet reminded always that he is a guest, not quite Roman. That duality will define him forever. In the evenings he might have looked out across the Bosporus, the sea glimmering under the moon. Behind him, Constantinople's walls towered triple lines of stone that no army had breached. Ahead, far beyond the waters, lay his people, Ostrogoths, fierce, restless, waiting. He knew he would one day return, and that the skills he gathered here, negotiation, patience, the ability to wear a calm mask, would be his weapons, as surely as the sword on his hip. There is a curious tidbit whispered by later chroniclers that Theodoric, though raised amid such grandeur, preferred to eat simply, sometimes tearing at roasted meat with his hands, Gothic style even in refined company. Was it defiance, nostalgia, or just comfort? No one knows, but you can see the boy, sitting at a long Roman table, nobles, politely averting their eyes as he chews with a grin reminding them that no amount of silk could erase who he was. When he finally returned to his people around the age of 18, he did so not as a stranger but as a bridge. You imagine the homecoming Gothic warriors gathered around campfires, their faces lit by flames, watching as the young man rode into camp. He carried himself with Roman polish, but his heart beat in rhythm with theirs. They saw in him not just a prince, but a leader who had glimpsed the inner workings of empire and survived. Theodoric's youth was shaped by this duality. He would always be a Gothic king who understood Romans better than most Goths ever could, and yet a man Romans could never fully embrace as one of their own. Historians still argue whether this made him a tragic figure forever torn between two worlds, or the perfect ruler for an Italy that itself lived between past and future. You continue walking the quiet corridors of his childhood in Constantinople, hearing the echoes of Latin lessons and the shuffle of sandals across marble. You see him watching the emperor hold court, absorbing the performance of power, the carefully measured words, the rich garments, the aura of inevitability. Later, when he rules in Ravenna, you will recognize these same patterns woven into his style of kingship. He is learning even if he does not yet know it. Step outside with him one last time into the city at night. Lanterns glow on the streets, merchants pack away their goods, sailors' voices drift from the harbors. Theodoric looks out across the water, imagining a future not yet written, a destiny that will carry him back to Italy. You can almost feel his quiet resolve. This child of hostages will one day be king not only of his people, but of lands where Roman ruins sleep beneath the stars. You leave behind the glittering domes of Constantinople and ride westward with Theodoric, now grown into a tall and commanding figure. He no longer looks like the boy who once stood uncertain in imperial halls. Instead, he is the leader of the Ostrogoths, his people gathered behind him in a long, restless migration. Their wagons creak, their horses stamp, and their children cling to blankets as they follow rivers and mountain passes toward the promise of new lands. You picture the scene, thousands of Goths' families and warriors' grandmothers with lined faces wrapped in furs, children dozing on wooden carts, young men carrying spears that glimmer faintly under the pale light of dawn. They march not in chaos, but in a great slow rhythm, moving as a people determined to carve out a home. Historians still argue whether this migration was voluntary or forced, whether Theodoric's pact with the Eastern Empire truly gave them freedom or simply pushed them westward as tools of imperial policy. Yet here they are, their hopes tied to the steady hand of their king. The land they enter is both strange and familiar. Italy, once the heart of Rome, lies battered but fertile. Fields stretch wide, dotted with ruins where farmers still plant wheat between fallen columns. Aqueducts lie broken, but streams still carry cool water through the valleys. The sun falls on the same soil that once fed Caesar's legions, yet now the soil waits for new rulers, new sowers, new guardians. Theodoric rides at the front, his horse snorting in the crisp air. You watch him glance from side to side, measuring the roads, the bridges, the villages they pass. He has seen Rome's order, he knows the weight of empire. Yet, he is still Gothic at heart, trusting his strength, his charisma, his ability to keep warriors loyal. There's a curious tidbit often told about him. He was so strong that he could split a man in two with a single sword stroke. Whether fact or legend, it lingers in the air around him, shaping his men's awe and enemies' fear. But strength alone will not settle Italy. The people they meet along the way, the weary Romans clinging to their traditions, the peasants wary of these fur-clad newcomers, must be coaxed, reassured, or at times intimidated. You can almost hear the low hum of negotiations around campfires, Roman envoys approaching with stiff voices, Gothic warriors grumbling about land and loot. Theodoric listens to both his eyes, calm his words, careful. He knows his people hunger for more than promises. As the march continues, you notice how the knights must have felt. Imagine bedding down beside a fire, hearing the rustle of leather, the faint sound of a mother humming her child to sleep. Around you the stars blaze above the Apennines, ancient and indifferent. In that stillness the thought creeps in, will this march end in triumph or in another exile? Historians still argue whether Theodoric envisioned himself as a king of Romans or only of Goths. The line between conqueror and saviour remains blurred. Yet, step by step, valley by valley, the Ostrogoths push deeper. Villages bend to their presence. Cities close their gates, uncertain whether to resist or submit. Theodoric does not rush. He has learned patience in Constantinople, and he moves like a man who knows that timing is as much a weapon as any sword. His warriors, fierce and restless, begin to sense his confidence, and in their loyalty, a quiet unity grows. One evening, you find yourself walking through their camp. Fires flicker against the dark smoke curling upward into the night sky. Warriors sit, sharpening blades, their laughter mixing with the crackle of wood. Children chase each other between tents, their giggles momentarily drowning out the heavy silence of displacement. Theodoric sits apart, speaking softly with his captains. His voice is low, but you catch fragments: patience, order, destiny. He carries not just the burden of command, but the dreams of a people who have wandered for generations. Italy lies ahead like a sleeping giant, its cities weary but still proud, its soil rich with memory. You can almost feel the anticipation building, the moment before storm and settlement. Soon the march of the Ostrogoths will turn into battle, and the quiet roads will echo with steel. But tonight, under the stars, you sense only the rhythm of migration, the slow heartbeat of a people following their king into a future yet unknown. You step quietly into the early morning mist, the kind that clings to the low marshes and makes every movement seem slower, softer, almost unreal. Theodoric and his Ostrogoths have marched deep into Italy, and now, before the walls of Ravenna, the decisive clash with Odoacer unfolds. The air is heavy, filled with the smell of damp earth and iron, the hush before battle, when even the birds seem to hold their breath. Odoacer, the man who once toppled the last Roman emperor in the West, has ruled Italy for nearly 2 decades. He is no fool, and his forces are seasoned. He commands Roman troops, still loyal to him, mercenaries drawn by pay, and a network of alliances with local elites. But Theodoric has something different, a people bound not only by the promise of land, but by trust in his leadership. The march has forged them into a single body, hungry and united. You imagine standing on a wooden bridge across the Tiber, or perhaps a marsh road near Ravenna. The chronicles differ, and historians still argue about where the decisive moment truly happened. What they agree on is the silence before the clash. You picture Theodoric on his horse, the fog clinging to his cloak, his sword raised in one steady hand. Across from him, Odoacer steels himself, his men shifting nervously in the damp. Then the sound breaks, the thunder of hooves, the crash of steel, the cries of men surging into combat. You move with them, not in the frenzy of gore, but in the rhythm of battle as seen from a distance, shields clashing like drumbeats, swords ringing like harsh bells. The bridge groans under the weight of bodies, and, in the chaos, Theodoric pushes forward his presence like a steady flame amid smoke. There's a curious tidbit often told that during one of these battles, Theodoric struck Odoacer so hard in combat that his spear snapped in two. Whether truth or legend, it fits the image of a man remembered as both a warrior of raw strength and a ruler of calm patience. You can almost hear the splintering wood, the sudden gasp of men around him as the fight rages. Theodoric's Goths press harder wave after wave until Odoacer's men falter. Some flee, slipping into the marshlands, others are driven back toward Ravenna's high, stubborn walls. The city itself, with its waterways and fortifications, will not fall easily. In fact, it will endure a long, grinding siege. But for now, in this moment, Theodoric has shown his people and his enemies that he is no longer just a leader of wanderers. He is a king capable of winning Italy by force. When the day ends, the battlefield lies quiet again. The fog settles back in, muffling the sounds of groans and distant cries. You walk slowly among the trampled earth, the broken spears, the dented shields. The silence now is different. It is not the expectant hush before battle, but the heavy quiet of aftermath, where men reckon with what has been lost and what might yet be gained. In a nearby tent, Theodoric sits with his captains, his armor dented, his face streaked with dirt, but his eyes steady. He speaks of patience, of the long struggle ahead, for he knows Ravenna will not yield easily. His men listen weary, yet inspired. They believe in him because they have seen him in the thick of battle unshaken. You step outside once more into the marsh air. The moon hangs pale above the reeds, casting silver light on the rippling waters. Somewhere in the distance, Odoacer plots his defense, clinging to power with desperation. Somewhere closer, Gothic families huddle by fires, whispering prayers that this long war might soon bring them a home. And you, drifting through it all, feel the balance of history tilting. The quiet rule of Theodoric is not yet born, but its first heartbeat sounds here in the clash at the bridge and the silence that follows. You walk slowly into Ravenna's marshlands, where the reeds sway like whispering sentinels, and the air hangs heavy with the scent of brine and pine resin. Months have passed since the clash that broke Odoacer's power in the open field, and now the struggle has narrowed to this one stubborn city. Ravenna, with its waterways and moats, its walls guarded by marshes, has become a cage of patience. Theodoric waits his Goths posted at every approach, while inside Odoacer and his followers endure hunger, suspicion, and the creeping dread of inevitable surrender. Yet here is where Theodoric begins to reveal himself as more than a mere warlord. Instead of battering endlessly at Ravenna's gates, he weaves politics into his strategy. He knows that to rule Italy, he must not only defeat Odoacer, but also win the trust, or at least the compliance, of Romans still clinging to dignity. So he balances his Gothic might with Roman ceremony. He does not crown himself king immediately, nor does he present himself as a conqueror alone. Rather, he casts himself as a restorer of order, a bringer of calm to a land weary of chaos. Historians still argue whether Odoacer's final surrender was born from negotiation or exhaustion. Some say famine gnawed too sharply at Ravenna's belly. Others insist that Theodoric offered generous terms, luring Odoacer into believing they could share rule. What is certain is that one quiet day in 493 the gates opened and Odoacer emerged to meet his rival. There is an ancient tidbit passed down by chroniclers that at the banquet held to seal their peace, Theodoric suddenly rose and struck Odoacer with his own hand, cutting him down in a single blow. The earth cannot bear two masters, he is said to have declared. Whether this moment is literal truth or a sharpened legend, it lingers in the mind, a scene both violent and theatrical, a reminder that even kings who speak of peace often seal it with blood. After Odoacer's death, the silence inside Ravenna must have been palpable. You can imagine the halls of the palace echoing with footsteps, servants watching nervously as new banners were unfurled, the Gothic king settling into marble chambers once ruled by Romans. Yet outside among the people there is relief mingled with caution. Odoacer is gone, yes, but who is this tall, broad-shouldered king with fur-lined cloak and Roman advisers at his side? Will he plunder like a barbarian or govern like a Caesar? Theodoric moves carefully. He does not wear the diadem of an emperor, nor does he discard Gothic custom. He insists on a throne, yes, but he couches his rule in the language of continuity. The Senate still meets, Roman law still carries weight, churches still hold their ceremonies. You watch him walk through Ravenna's streets, nodding to Roman nobles, clasping hands with Gothic warriors balancing on a narrow bridge between two worlds. At night, you picture him seated in the great palace, once Odoacer's, now his. Lamps flicker, shadows stretch across the walls, and he considers the enormity of what he has taken. He is a king without an official crown, ruling by recognition of the Eastern Emperor and by the strength of his Gothic sword. His power rests not only on conquest, but on this fragile illusion that Rome lives on, though in Gothic hands. And so the land outside Ravenna slowly quiets. Farmers return to their fields, their ploughs cutting through dark soil once again. Merchants reopen stalls selling olives and cloth. Children laugh in courtyards where soldiers once sharpened blades. Theodoric's presence, stern yet calm, becomes the rhythm of daily life. He is no emperor, yet he carries himself like one, moving through the city with a calm dignity that makes both Goth and Roman pause and bow. You wander into the hush of Ravenna's basilicas, where mosaics glitter in the lamplight, tiny squares of glass forming saints, emperors, and angels. Soon new mosaics will appear, commissioned by Theodoric, blending Roman skill with Gothic ambition. For now, though you hear only the soft shuffle of worshippers, the murmured prayers for peace. A king without a crown, yet with a kingdom to rule. That is how you leave Theodoric tonight, standing in Ravenna's marble halls, his hand resting on the arm of a chair carved with Roman eagles, his gaze steady as he looks toward the uncertain years ahead. You drift with the tide of time deeper into Ravenna, where the marshland city becomes a jewel of mosaics and quiet splendor. Theodoric has chosen this place, not Rome, as his capital, and as you wander its streets, you sense why. Rome is still mighty in memory, but crumbling in reality, its palaces half empty, its aqueducts broken. Ravenna, by contrast, is guarded by waterways and fortified marshes, a city that seems to float between earth and water, protected by nature's hand. Step into its basilicas with him, and your eyes widen at the sight of walls glowing with color. Gold tesserae sparkle in candlelight. Saints and emperors gaze solemnly from glittering glass. These mosaics are more than decoration. They are symbols of continuity. Theodoric commissions them deliberately, reminding Romans that though their empire has passed, beauty and order can still flourish. You can almost feel the cool stone beneath your fingertips as you trace the shimmering outlines of a halo, a fragment of eternity captured in glass. Outside Ravenna hums with life. Theodoric repairs aqueducts, restores granaries, and secures the flow of food into the city. You stroll past markets where merchants offer figs, oil, and cloth their voices carrying in the salty air. Children dart through alleys, their laughter echoing against high walls. For the first time in years, stability begins to seep into daily life. Historians still argue whether this prosperity came from Theodoric's true vision of peace or from the sheer relief of war's end, but either way the people sense calm. You walk beside the king as he inspects the city's defenses, his Gothic cloak sweeping behind him, while Roman senators shuffle nearby. He listens more than he speaks, nodding gravely as engineers explain repairs, as priests whisper requests, as Gothic captains argue for greater spoils. He is a mediator as much as a ruler, a man who balances the demands of his warriors with the expectations of Rome's elite. There is an ancient tidbit whispered about him that despite his regal bearing, he enjoyed simple pleasures, often strolling through gardens with his guards plucking fruit from trees and eating it on the spot. Picture him in Ravenna's orchards, sunlight dappling through branches, juice dripping down his hand as he laughs softly, a king who has tasted both hardship and triumph, savouring a moment of quiet sweetness. Night falls and you slip into Ravenna's quiet streets. Lamps flicker on corners, shadows lengthen over canals, and the scent of smoke drifts from hearths where families gather. In a modest home, a mother hums as she rocks her child to sleep. In another, old men reminisce about Rome's glory days while nodding to the new Gothic order. Theodoric, seated in his palace, is not far away. He speaks with advisors, his voice steady weaving Roman law with Gothic custom creating a fragile tapestry of order. Historians still debate whether Theodoric truly believed he was reviving Rome or whether he merely borrowed its clothing for legitimacy. Yet as you stand here, surrounded by Ravenna's shimmering basilicas and its murmuring canals, the distinction seems less important. What matters is the quiet, the absence of chaos, the breath of relief after decades of uncertainty. You pause in the grand mausoleum of Galla Placidia, where deep blue mosaics swirl with stars above your head. The stillness here feels almost eternal. It is easy to imagine Theodoric walking into such a space, inhaling the scent of incense, feeling the cool air on his face and thinking to himself that perhaps he too could leave behind a legacy in stone and glass, something that whispers of order long after he is gone. Ravenna under Theodoric's hand is no longer just a city of exile or marshes. It becomes a beacon of quiet splendor, a place where Gothic strength and Roman artistry coexist in fragile harmony. You step outside into the night, listening to the hush of water against stone, and realize that in these canals and mosaics, the Gothic king's dream of peace is already taking shape. You wander through Ravenna's candlelit halls and the air hums with the low murmur of voices, Gothic warriors with deep laughter on one side, Roman senators with polished manners on the other. Theodoric presides between them, his presence like a bridge arched across two different worlds. The table before him is spread with roasted meats, olives, bread, and wine. The Goths eat heartily, tearing hunks of meat with their hands, while the Romans sip cautiously, their fingers lingering on silver cups. Theodoric watches both his calm eyes, scanning every gesture. He knows that peace is more fragile than glass, and these gatherings matter as much as battles. A senator might flatter with smooth Latin phrases, while a Gothic captain slaps his chest and boasts of conquests. You can almost hear the tension in the room, the clinking of goblets covering the unease, the faint scrape of sandals against marble floors. Historians still argue whether the Goths and Romans ever truly trusted each other, or if they merely tolerated the arrangement under Theodoric's stern watch. What is certain is that the king insisted on this mingling, forcing warriors and senators alike to sit side by side to break bread at the same tables. He knew that without such uneasy banquets, the two halves of his kingdom might never weave together. You step outside for a moment into a courtyard where torches flicker in the night. There you see Roman children chasing one another, laughing in the shadows, while Gothic guards stand watch at the gates. The scene is ordinary, almost peaceful, but beneath it lies centuries of fear and rivalry. And yet Theodoric's hand keeps the balance steady like a tightrope walker moving carefully across a rope stretched over an abyss. There is a curious tidbit whispered about him that he often seated Roman senators and Gothic captains deliberately closed so they had no choice but to speak. Imagine their stiff greetings softening into cautious conversation as the night deepened, wine loosening tongues, stories spilling across cultural lines. Perhaps a senator told of Rome's old glories, and a Gothic warrior countered with tales of forest hunts and harsh winters. For a moment in the candlelight, their worlds touched. Theodoric himself favoured silence over speeches at these meals. He was not a man of long words, but of steady presence. He might nod approvingly at a well-told story, or chuckle softly at a boast, but he let the weight of his authority speak louder than any flourish. His silence was not emptiness, it was control, the kind that reminded all present that the peace of Italy rested on his shoulders. As the evening wanes, music drifts through the hall. Perhaps a Roman lyre strums softly, its notes weaving with the deeper rhythms of Gothic chants. The mix is uneasy, yet strangely harmonious, like two melodies overlapping. You close your eyes and hear it, the sound of cultures brushing against each other, not without friction, but not without beauty either. Historians still debate how deep this blending truly went. Were these dinners the start of genuine unity, or only a performance staged to soothe suspicions? No one can say for sure, but for the people gathered there, the warriors, the senators, the servants carrying platters, it must have felt like standing at the threshold of something fragile and new. Later that night, when the banquet has ended and the hall grows quiet, Theodoric lingers. He rises from his seat, his cloak brushing the floor, and he walks alone through Ravenna's colonnades. The moonlight spills on mosaics and marble alike, and he pauses, perhaps thinking of the task still before him. He has brought Goths and Romans to the same table, but can he keep them there in peace? The night air is cool, scented with pine and sea salt, and the king moves on, silent as ever, the weight of two worlds pressing gently against his broad shoulders. You move softly through Ravenna's streets at dawn, where church bells toll and the air carries the mingled scents of incense and wood smoke. Within these basilicas lies a tension that Theodoric cannot ignore. For though he is king of Italy, his faith is not the faith of most of his people. He is an Arian Christian taught that Christ is divine, but not equal to the Father, a creed condemned as heresy by the Catholic majority of Romans. Step inside a church and you feel the divide instantly. Roman Catholics kneel before altars adorned with candles, their priests chanting the creed of Nicene orthodoxy. Outside, Gothic warriors gather for their own Arian rites, simpler, harsher, stripped of Catholic ceremony. Theodoric, standing between these worlds, must balance carefully, for he knows faith can fracture kingdoms as surely as swords. Historians still argue whether he was personally devout or whether he treated religion mostly as politics, but all agree that he tread this line with unusual calm. You can imagine him walking into a basilica, tall and broad, his Gothic cloak sweeping behind him. The congregation stirs uneasily, an Arian king in a Catholic sanctuary. Yet he does not seek to disrupt. He listens quietly, offering respect without participating, his very presence a reminder of the fragile peace he enforces. Later, he might attend an Arian service with his Goths, the chants rougher, the setting plainer, his voice rising among them. In both places he is at home, and in neither fully so. There's a curious tidbit whispered by chroniclers that Theodoric, though firmly Arian, once paid for the repairs of Catholic churches, ensuring they gleamed with mosaics and marble. Imagine a Catholic priest standing in a restored basilica, uncertain whether to thank the king, whose beliefs he considered heresy, yet grateful that the roof no longer leaked on his flock. Theodoric understood that stability required more than military victories. It required tolerance, or at least the appearance of it. As you walk through Ravenna, you see this balance everywhere. Catholic bishops still debate theology in echoing halls, while Gothic nobles guard the city gates, their prayers whispered in another form of Christianity. Markets hum with both Goths and Romans buying bread and wine, their faiths unspoken, but always present. Theodoric allows both worlds to exist, insisting that no one disturb the peace. Historians still argue whether this was true tolerance or simply a pragmatic strategy to keep swords sheathed, but for a generation it worked. Step into the palace one evening, and you find Theodoric seated with Cassiodorus, his Roman advisor, speaking of laws and decrees. A petition arrives from a Catholic bishop complaining of Gothic practices. Theodoric listens, frowns slightly, then answers with calm authority, "All may keep their faith so long as they keep the peace." His voice carries no anger, only the steady rhythm of command, a lullaby of order in a land once fractured. But beneath the calm lies unease. Rumours stir that Constantinople, ever orthodox, whispers disapproval of Theodoric's Arian creed. Priests warn that heresy cannot rule forever. Senators nod politely at the king, but murmur doubts in private. And among the Goths there are grumbles that too much deference is given to Roman bishops. You can almost hear the friction, like the faint grinding of stones beneath the city's foundations. Still tonight, the streets are quiet. You wander past basilicas glowing with lamplight, their mosaics shimmering like stars. Inside, worshippers bow their heads, some in Nicene devotion, others in Arian simplicity. Theodoric has kept the fragile balance, walking a path that could crumble at any step. But for now, the city breathes in peace, and you, moving softly through its candlelit streets, feel the steady hum of faiths coexisting under the Gothic king's watchful eye. You move through Ravenna's palace as the evening light fades, the hallways cool and echoing with the faint scrape of sandals against marble. Here Theodoric sits at a long table, not feasting this time, but dictating laws, his deep voice measured and steady. Around him, scribes lean over parchment, their quills scratching like crickets in the twilight. These are not just Gothic commands shouted on the battlefield. They are written decrees meant to endure an attempt to bind two peoples with words rather than chains. Theodoric does not sweep away Roman law. Instead, he respects it, weaving his own Gothic traditions into its framework. To Romans, he declares, "Your laws remain, your senate endures, your courts still function." To Goths, he promises your customs are honored, your leaders are respected, your identity remains intact. Two parallel streams of justice flow through Italy, separate yet side by side. Historians still argue whether this was ingenious or fragile, whether it fostered peace or sowed division for future generations. But for now it works. You step closer, watching as one decree is read aloud. It concerns land disputes, a matter both vital and dangerous. Roman landowners fear losing their estates to Gothic settlers, while Gothic warriors demand their promised share of Italy's soil. Theodoric, ever cautious, dictates a balance. Romans keep their property. If they remain loyal, Goths are granted allotments without stripping Rome's nobility of all wealth. It is compromise written in ink, enforced by the king's reputation for fairness. There is a curious tidbit recorded by later writers. Theodoric, despite his Gothic roots, took great pride in Roman law's precision. He is said to have remarked that justice was the true shield of kings, sturdier than armor. Imagine him leaning back in his chair, his heavy hands resting on the table, speaking those words softly while the scribes glance at one another in surprise. A Gothic king praising Roman justice, such a thought might have seemed impossible a generation before. Outside you wander into Ravenna's quiet streets, where the results of these laws can be felt. A farmer disputes a boundary with his neighbor, and instead of reaching for a sword, he appeals to a magistrate. A Gothic warrior grumbles that he deserves more land, but he sits before a judge to make his claim. It is not perfect, and tempers often flare, yet there is structure, a rhythm of justice pulsing through Italy again. Inside the Senate hall, Roman senators gather, their togas rustling as they sit beneath mosaics of old emperors. They murmur approval at the king's respect for their traditions, even as they know he holds the real power. For them, Theodoric's laws are a lifeline, a way to preserve dignity in a world where their empire has crumbled. For the Goths, the same laws are a reassurance that their swords have won them more than just loot. They have earned a place in Italy's fabric. Historians still debate whether Theodoric truly understood the fragility of this arrangement. Could two sets of laws really coexist without one swallowing the other? Was he building harmony or only postponing inevitable conflict? The answers are uncertain, yet the fact remains for 3 decades. Italy breathes more steadily under his decrees than it had in many years before. As the night deepens, you slip into the scriptorium where monks copy texts by lamplight. The steady scratch of quills matches the rhythm of Theodoric's reforms, quiet, deliberate, enduring. The law is not glamorous, not sung of in ballads, but here in Ravenna it becomes the heartbeat of a kingdom, as vital as any mosaic or battle won. Theodoric himself retires to his chambers, rolling parchment in his hands, his eyes scanning words he cannot fully read, but whose power he deeply understands. He is a king who rules not only with the sword, but with the weight of laws written in twilight laws meant to steady a fractured land. You drift into Ravenna's harbour, where ships bob gently in the brackish water, their masts swaying like tall reeds against the evening sky. The air is heavy with tar salt and spices, a reminder that Theodoric's Italy is not cut off from the world, but woven into its trade routes. Emissaries arrive from far horizons, their sails painted with strange symbols, their holds filled with silk amber and fine glass. Each visitor steps carefully onto Ravenna's wharves, aware that this Gothic king holds power over lands that once belonged to emperors. You follow one party of ambassadors as they ascend into the city. Their robes shimmer with foreign dyes, their voices carry accents from across the seas. They bring gifts, golden vessels, carved ivory, exotic animals that make children gasp with wonder. In the palace they bow low before Theodoric, who sits in calm dignity, his Gothic cloak lined with fur, his seat framed by mosaics that gleam with Roman craftsmanship. He does not rush to speak. Instead, he listens, his silence as steady as stone, until at last he answers with measured words that promise friendship but not submission. Historians still argue whether these embassies reveal Theodoric's true stature in the eyes of the world, or whether they were simply polite exchanges masking a fragile balance. What cannot be doubted is that Ravenna became a stage where distant powers came to perform deference. From the Frankish kings in Gaul to the Vandals across the sea, from the Visigoths in Spain to the Eastern Romans in Constantinople, each sought to know how to live alongside the Gothic master of Italy. There is a curious tidbit told by chroniclers once an embassy arrived from distant India, bearing gifts so strange that the people of Ravenna whispered in awe. Among them, it is said, was a great bird, with feathers the colour of fire, carried in a golden cage. Whether this is truth or embellishment, you can imagine the astonishment in the hall as courtiers craned their necks, Gothic warriors chuckled in disbelief, and Theodoric sat in thoughtful silence, recognizing that even the farthest lands now knew his name. Step outside the palace and wander through the markets at dusk. Merchants from the east haggle over spices, Franks bargain for cloth, and Gothic guards lean on spears, watching the flow of people with calm vigilance. The chatter of many languages fills the air, a soft chorus beneath the cry of gulls overhead. You realize that under Theodoric's rule, Italy is not only a land of restored fields and repaired aqueducts, it is a crossroads, a hub where the wider world comes knocking. In one corner of the marketplace, a Roman scribe copies treaties, his hand moving swiftly over parchment as envoys dictate their promises. In another, Gothic soldiers laugh with foreign traders exchanging coins for trinkets and tales, Theodoric's presence hovers over it all, a reminder that peace in Italy is both a shield and a beacon. His court is not only a place of Gothic warriors and Roman senators, but also of distant voices, each bearing news of shifting alliances beyond the horizon. Historians still debate whether Theodoric sought empire or merely stability. Did he dream of uniting the old Roman West under his banner, or was he content with Italy alone? The embassies suggest both possibilities. Some saw him as a potential emperor, in all but name a man who could revive Rome's grandeur. Others viewed him as a careful manager, content to maintain respect without overreaching. The truth, like the gifts piled in his palace, may be a mixture of both. As the evening deepens, you sit with Theodoric in his audience hall. The air is perfumed with incense torches, cast a golden glow on mosaics of emperors long gone. The king receives another envoy, nods gravely at carefully chosen words, then dismisses him with calm authority. Once again, silence fills the hall, a silence more powerful than any boast. Theodoric knows that in a fractured world, sometimes the quiet weight of presence is the most enduring form of rule. You drift into the soft hum of Ravenna's countryside, where orchards spread wide beneath a pale sky, and the air is heavy with the scent of ripening fruit. Theodoric, unlike so many rulers before him, takes a deep interest in the land itself, for he knows that kings cannot live on conquest alone. Peace, he believes, must be nourished with bread and wine, with markets that bustle and fields that flourish, and so you walk beside him as he surveys the gardens and granaries, his gaze calm, his words quiet but purposeful. You see farmers stooping to tend wheat fields, their hands brushing golden stalks that sway in the breeze. Beside them, Gothic settlers lend their strength, ploughing the dark earth, their laughter carrying across the rows. Historians still argue whether these labours were truly shared in harmony, or whether simmering tensions lurked just beneath the surface. What is certain is that Theodoric pushed for balance, urging Goths and Romans alike to till the soil, restore abandoned farms, and bring the countryside back to life after decades of ruin. There is a curious tidbit recorded in later chronicles. Theodoric himself was fond of gardens, and is said to have enjoyed walking among fruit trees, plucking pears or figs as he went. Picture him beneath a canopy of leaves, sunlight dappling his cloak juice running down his fingers as he savoured a simple sweetness. A Gothic king, fierce in battle, pausing to taste the gifts of the earth, it is an image both human and regal, a reminder that his rule was as much about tending life as it was about commanding death. You continue with him to the markets where the air is filled with the calls of traders. Baskets overflow with grapes, olives, and grain. Pottery gleams in neat rows. Cloth in vivid dyes ripples in the breeze. Children tug at their mothers' hands, pointing to figs or honey cakes, while merchants haggle in voices that weave into a music of commerce. Theodoric's officials watch quietly, ensuring fair measures and steady supplies. For the people, the king's laws mean more than parchment. They mean bread on the table, oil for lamps, wine for evenings of laughter. Step inside a granary where the cool air smells of dust and wheat. Gothic guards stand watch as workers stack sacks of grain in neat rows. Theodoric insists on reserves, for he remembers famine too well from his wandering youth. You imagine him speaking softly to an overseer, better to store now, so no child goes hungry in winter. His voice is practical, but beneath it runs a deeper current of care. Historians still debate whether Italy truly prospered under his hand, or whether prosperity was confined to favoured regions near Ravenna. Yet as you walk these fields and hear the steady hum of villages at dusk, it is clear that life here feels calmer than in the years of Odoacer or the chaos before. Peace is not only in laws or battles won, it is in the rustle of wheat, the laughter in markets, the quiet clink of coins changing hands. Evening falls and you sit by a vineyard as shadows lengthen over rows of vines. Workers rest on the ground, their baskets full, their voices murmuring softly of the day's labours. Theodoric stands nearby, his cloak stirring in the breeze, his face lit by the glow of the setting sun. He does not need to speak for his presence to reassure them. In their eyes, he is the guardian of these harvests, the reason their children can laugh freely again. You close your eyes and let the sounds wash over you, the chirp of crickets, the faint splash of water in irrigation channels the low hum of voices drifting like lullabies. In this moment you feel what Theodoric wanted his kingdom to be, a place where gardens and grain whisper of peace, where the rhythm of life is restored one harvest at a time. You find yourself in a quiet chamber, lit by oil lamps, their flames flickering against painted walls. Here, in the heart of Ravenna, Theodoric gathers not only warriors and senators, but also thinkers, men whose words weigh as heavily as any sword. The soft murmur of voices fills the air, Boethius the philosopher steeped in Platonic thought, and Cassiodorus the statesman who pens decrees with elegant flourish. You drift closer, and their conversation becomes a gentle current pulling you in. Boethius speaks of harmony, comparing kingdoms to lyres. Each string must be tuned neither too tight nor too loose if the music of governance is to be played. Cassiodorus counters with legal phrases, shaping Theodoric's Gothic commands into Roman words that senators can respect. The king himself listens, broad shoulders hunched slightly, his silence attentive. He does not interrupt often. When he does, it is with brief, grounded questions, always steering thought toward order and peace. Historians still argue whether Theodoric truly grasped the depth of philosophy or whether he relied entirely on advisors to translate ideas into action. Yet here, in this lamplit chamber, his presence alone shapes the discussion. He is the anchor, the reason these scholars feel their words may matter, the reason their ideas may find fertile ground in law and policy. There is a curious tidbit told by later chroniclers that Theodoric once jested with Boethius about geometry, pretending to puzzle over a diagram before laughing heartily. Imagine the scene: Gothic king leaning over parchment brow, furrowed in mock seriousness, before chuckling in a deep voice that startled the scribes. Even a ruler forged in battles found room for humour in the company of philosophers. You move into another chamber where Cassiodorus bends over parchment writing letters that carry Theodoric's voice across the kingdom. His words are rich, layered with Roman elegance, petitions to bishops, instructions to governors, replies to foreign kings. Yet behind every word lies Theodoric's steady hand, his vision of unity clothed in Roman rhetoric. You can almost hear the scratch of quills, the rustle of parchment, the quiet determination of men preserving civilization word by word. Outside in the cloisters, young students whisper lines of Latin poetry, their voices rising into the night air. Boethius encourages them, reminding them that learning is a fortress stronger than stone. You imagine him pausing, gazing at the stars, and speaking softly of the eternal order that guides both heavens and human fate. His words drift like lullabies, comforting and profound. Theodoric supports these pursuits not out of idle curiosity, but from a conviction that stability requires culture. He knows that without scholars laws weaken, and without laws peace dissolves. His court becomes not only a place of Gothic rule, but a haven where philosophy and faith, law and memory continue to breathe. Historians still debate whether this was deliberate foresight or the natural consequence of Roman traditions clinging to life, but the result is clear: Ravenna hums with thought as well as power. As the night deepens, you walk past the scholars gathered one last time. Boethius speaks of fortune's wheel turning without pause, lifting kings only to lower them again. Theodoric listens, eyes shadowed in lamplight, perhaps wondering how long his own quiet rule can endure. The thought lingers like a soft chill in the room. For now, though the lamps still burn, the quills still scratch, and philosophy still whispers its gentle truths beneath the watchful eye of the Gothic king. The night air in Ravenna grows heavier, the kind of silence that carries unease more than calm. You walk with Theodoric through colonnades where torches flicker, and you feel the weight of whispers pressing from every shadow. After years of stability, rumors now coil like smoke betrayals in the Senate letters to Constantinople bishops, stirring unrest. The Gothic king, once so steady, listens more closely, his brow furrowed, his trust thinning. Historians still argue whether these suspicions were grounded in fact or whether age and the pressures of rule sharpened them into sharper fears. What is known is that Rome's senators, proud of their ancestry, never fully accepted Gothic supremacy. Some admired Theodoric's justice, others plotted against him, and many balanced carefully between loyalty and ambition. To the king, this ambiguity feels like a storm cloud gathering over calm seas. Step into the palace audience hall and you hear senators bowing low, their voices smooth, their words carefully chosen. Yet behind their eyes, Theodoric imagines hidden messages, their tongues split between deference and deceit. He remembers too well the duplicity of emperors in Constantinople, how agreements could shift overnight, how smiles could mask daggers. His silence at banquets grows longer, his gaze heavier, as though searching for treachery in every face. There is a curious tidbit whispered by chroniclers that Theodoric once dreamt of a giant fish rising from the sea near Ravenna, its gaping mouth devouring everything in sight. Some said it was a warning of betrayal, others a symbol of his fears consuming him. Whether dream or invention, it captures the sense of unease that clings to these years, when shadows seem to stretch longer than the light. Outside the palace, the streets still hum with life markets bustle, churches glow with lamplight, children chase each other through alleys. Yet even here you sense tension beneath the surface. A senator's carriage rattles by its wheels, echoing too loudly. A priest murmurs to a crowd, his words too sharp to be mere sermons. Gossip drifts through taverns, whispers of plots of letters carried eastward of Rome's old order, stirring restlessly. Theodoric walks through his gardens, plucking a fig, chewing slowly, but his thoughts are far away. He hears of Constantinople's emperor Anastasius, whose policies shift like sand, and of the growing rift between Eastern and Western Christians. Each rumor feeds his unease. His advisors counsel patience, but he feels the weight of suspicion pressing against his chest like armor too heavy to shed. Historians still debate whether this was the moment when the Gothic king turned from calm mediator to wary ruler. Was it inevitable that mistrust would grow between conqueror and conquered, or could the peace have lasted had fortune's wheel spun differently? The answers remain clouded like the dream of the great fish. Night falls, and you linger by the palace gates. The guards stand silent, their spears glinting in the torchlight. Beyond the walls, Ravenna sleeps uneasily, its people caught between gratitude for peace and fear of what storms may come. Theodoric, gazing out across the marshes, feels the same tension. The quiet rule he built is beginning to tremble, as if the calm surface of a pond is stirred by something unseen beneath. You step into a chamber, lit by thin shafts of sunlight, dust motes drifting like restless spirits. Theodoric sits on his throne, his heavy cloak pooling at his feet, and before him stands Boethius, the philosopher, once cherished in the king's circle. The room is tense, as though every shadow leans closer to hear. Once these two men had spoken of harmony, of fortune's wheel of order built on wisdom. Now suspicion hangs between them like a drawn sword. Historians still argue whether Boethius was truly guilty of treason, of conspiring with Constantinople, or whether envy and intrigue among senators poisoned Theodoric's mind. What is certain is that charges were brought, voices accused him, and the Gothic king, burdened by distrust, allowed the philosopher to be condemned. You watch as Boethius is led away, his eyes calm, his chains rattling softly like a grim music. There is a curious tidbit told by later writers that while imprisoned, Boethius composed his great work, The Consolation of Philosophy. Picture him in a dim cell, the walls damp with Ravenna's marsh air, scratching lines onto parchment by lamplight. Philosophy personified as a woman came to comfort him, reminding him that fortune turns her wheel, lifting some, lowering others, but always spinning. His words, gentle yet profound, would echo through centuries, whispered in monasteries and royal courts long after Theodoric's reign had passed. You follow Boethius into that prison for a moment, hearing his quiet voice, reciting truths to himself that no earthly power is eternal, that wisdom endures beyond chains, that virtue is the true fortress of the soul. His words drift like lullabies of resilience, soothing even as he faced death. Outside, Theodoric paces his halls, muttering to himself. His trust shattered, his silence deeper than ever before. The city senses the shift, senses the senators whisper in fear, scholars bow their heads in mourning, and Gothic captains watch with unease. The balance between Rome and Goth begins to tilt, not through battle, but through mistrust. Boethius, once a bridge, becomes a wound, his condemnation a mark that stains Theodoric's quiet rule. Historians still debate whether the king regretted the sentence, whether sleepless nights brought him visions of the philosopher's calm face. Some say he dreamed of Boethius seated at his side, still teaching, still urging peace, only to awaken and remember the silence of the prison. Step outside and Ravenna's streets hum with an uneasy quiet. Citizens gather in clusters, murmuring that even the wisest are no longer safe. Priests wonder if suspicion will fall on them next. Theodoric's shadow stretches long across the city, no longer only a protector's presence, but something heavier, colder. The man who once bridged two worlds now seems to retreat into suspicion, into silence too deep to reach. Night falls, and you walk once more into the prison where Boethius lies. The flicker of his lamp is faint, but his words glow brighter than the flame reflections on justice, fate, and the enduring power of the soul. You sense that in losing him, Theodoric has lost something of himself too, a companion who once steadied his doubts, now gone forever. You walk with Theodoric into a hall where maps lie unfurled across a long wooden table, their lines stretching eastward toward Constantinople. Candles gutter in the draught shadows, dancing across the parchment like restless waves. Here, the Gothic king studies the empire he once knew as a child, the empire that still claims Rome's inheritance, the empire whose emperor now watches him with wary eyes. Theodoric's Italy, though calm within, exists under the long shadow of the Eastern Roman Empire. Relations with Constantinople shift like tides, sometimes friendly, sometimes cold, always complicated. Historians still argue whether Theodoric hoped to be recognized as a partner, almost an equal, or whether he simply feared the emperor's suspicion. What is certain is that the relationship grew tense, a slow rivalry pulsing across the Adriatic. You imagine a messenger arriving from Constantinople, weary from sea travel, carrying letters sealed in wax. Theodoric receives him in Ravenna's audience chamber, his face unreadable as the envoy bows. The letter praises peace, offers blessings, but beneath the ink lies caution, even warning. Theodoric listens, nods, dismisses the messenger with measured words. Only later, walking alone in the palace gardens, does he frown, the weight of mistrust pressing on him. There is a curious tidbit whispered by chroniclers that Theodoric, though king, was technically considered the emperor's viceroy in Italy, ruling in the emperor's name. Yet in practice he acted as sovereign, issuing laws, receiving embassies, and wearing the dignity of power. Imagine the tension: an emperor in the east insisting on supremacy, a Gothic king in the west ruling as though independent. Two rulers neither willing to bow fully, their silence across the sea louder than any words. You walk through Ravenna's streets at night, hearing citizens discuss the matter in hushed tones. Some Romans hope Constantinople will rein in the Goths, restore true Roman authority. Others fear interference, remembering the chaos of the past. Gothic warriors, meanwhile, grow restless at the thought of distant emperors daring to question their king's strength. Theodoric must steady them all, his calm voice assuring that his rule stands firm. In his council chamber, Cassiodorus crafts letters filled with elegant phrases, smoothing the edges of tension. His words assure Constantinople of loyalty, yet affirm Italy's dignity. You hear the scratching of his quill, the rhythm of diplomacy written in ink. Still you sense the unease beneath every letter. Every word is a careful step along a narrow path. Historians still debate whether Theodoric ever truly planned to defy Constantinople outright, or whether he hoped time would soften the emperor's suspicion. What is clear is that the rivalry deepened, sharpened by religious division, the Arian king against the Orthodox emperor. What began as political distance became a spiritual rift as well. As evening falls, you step into the mausoleum Theodoric is building for himself, its great stone dome rising like a quiet challenge to Roman grandeur. He stands there gazing at the massive blocks of stone, perhaps imagining how future generations will see him. Will they remember him as a loyal servant of Rome, or as a rival emperor in all but name? The silence of the chamber holds the question unanswered. You leave him there, his cloak brushing the stone floor, his thoughts lingering on Constantinople's distant throne. The rivalry grows colder, heavier, like storm clouds massing on the horizon. Italy breathes in uneasy calm, caught between a king's steady hand and an emperor's shadow stretching endlessly across the sea. You follow Theodoric into his later years, when the weight of age begins to bend his shoulders and the sharpness of youth softens into caution. He still walks Ravenna's colonnades, still presides over councils, still commands the loyalty of Gothic warriors and the wary respect of Roman senators. Yet now his steps are slower, his silence is longer, and his gaze more distant. The years of ruling have left lines on his face, not only from time, but from the burden of suspicion and the fear of decline. Historians still argue whether Theodoric's fears in these years were justified or exaggerated. Some say conspiracies truly threatened him, that whispers from Constantinople reached into his senate, that bishops stirred dissent against his Arian creed. Others suggest that isolation, age, and the memory of betrayals made him see enemies where none stood. Whatever the truth, the Gothic king begins to doubt even those closest to him. You step into the Senate hall where once he listened with calm patience. Now his eyes scan the faces of senators, searching for treachery in every glance. The chamber is still filled with marble dignity, the mosaics of emperors still gaze down from the walls, but the air feels heavier. Each polite word, each bow of the head is weighed in his mind like a hidden blade. There is a curious tidbit told by later chroniclers that in these final years, Theodoric would sometimes sit alone at night, speaking softly to himself as though debating unseen companions. Perhaps he argued with ghosts of the past, Odoacer, whom he struck down, Boethius, whom he condemned, or emperors he once served in Constantinople. Or perhaps he simply rehearsed his doubts aloud, trying to steady himself against the silence. You walk with him into his gardens, where once he found peace among fruit trees and flowers. The air still smells of figs and roses, but his hand trembles slightly as he plucks a pear. He eats more slowly, his face thoughtful, his eyes distant. He remembers the days when ambassadors bowed before him, when scholars debated philosophy in his halls, when the fields of Italy flourished with harvest. Now those memories seem fragile, like mosaics cracking under pressure. Ravenna too senses the change. Families still laugh in courtyards, children still chase each other through alleys, but the murmur of unease grows louder. Rumours of plots ripple through markets. Whispers of discontent slip between senators, and the clergy debate more openly whether an Arian king can truly be God's chosen ruler. Theodoric hears these whispers and carries them like stones in his heart. Historians still debate whether his decline was political more than personal, whether the empire's shadow pressed too heavily, or whether the weariness of age dimmed his once steady hand. But you can see the change in his face, a man who once bridged two worlds, now haunted by the thought that those worlds may never truly unite. At night, he lies awake in his palace, listening to the soft hum of water in Ravenna's canals. The city he built into quiet splendor feels both safe and suffocating. He remembers the boy he was in Constantinople, the warrior who crossed into Italy, the king who sat in marble halls commanding peace. Now he wonders if it was all slipping away, if his reign was only a fragile pause in history's greater storm. You walk beside his bed, hearing his breath, slow his thoughts restless. Theodoric, in doubt, is not less a king, he is more human, more vulnerable. A man who ruled with strength but ends with questions. His quiet rule, once steady as stone, begins to tremble like candlelight in the night, flickering with every draught of suspicion. You step softly into Ravenna's palace as the air grows thick and still. Theodoric, once the towering warrior who split shields and commanded thousands, now lies in his chamber, wrapped in furs, though summer heat presses against the shutters. His breath is slower, each exhale heavier than the last, the rhythm of a man nearing the end of a long journey. Around him, servants move quietly, their sandals brushing the floor, their eyes lowered in respect. The Gothic king has carried Italy through 3 decades of fragile peace. Now, with his body weakening, the question of what comes after weighs heavier than any crown he never wore. Historians still argue whether Theodoric's last days were marked by despair at his suspicions or pride in his achievements. What is certain is that in these final moments he is surrounded not by the clash of battle, but by silence broken only by the crackle of a dying fire. You imagine sitting near his bed listening as he recalls fragments of his life. His voice is low, almost a whisper, but steady, the boy hostage in Constantinople, learning the poise of emperors, the warrior who rode with his people across mountains and rivers, the king who entered Ravenna and struck down Odoacer with his own hand. His eyes glint faintly with memory as though the past glows brighter than the dim chamber around him. There is a curious tidbit whispered by later chroniclers that Theodoric, in his final hours, was haunted by a vision of a giant fish, the same monstrous creature from his earlier dream. It rose again in his mind, its jaws wide, its presence suffocating. Some said it symbolized his guilt for condemning Boethius, others that it was a sign of the empire's endless hunger devouring his peace. Whether dream or myth, it clung to his last breath. Outside the palace, Ravenna continues its rhythm. Merchants close their stalls, mothers call children in. From play, priests light lamps, for evening prayers. Few know that within the palace walls their king's life is ebbing away. They sleep unaware that history itself is shifting, that the hand which steadied Italy for 30 years is slipping into stillness. You remain at his side as the night deepens. Theodoric's breaths grow shorter, his lips tremble with unspoken thoughts, and his great hand, once strong enough to split men and steady nations, now rests limp upon the blanket. The silence stretches until at last there is no more breath, only the sound of water lapping faintly against Ravenna's marshes as though the city itself sighs. Historians still debate how those around him felt in that moment, whether Gothic captains wept openly, whether Roman senators sighed in relief or sorrow, whether the people understood what had been lost. But here in the quiet chamber, you feel only the stillness of passing the hush that follows when a life larger than itself has ended. You step back into the hall where shadows lengthen across the mosaics and realize that the Gothic King of Italy, Theodoric, who ruled with both sword and silence, has breathed his last. Ravenna will wake to a new dawn, uncertain and trembling, but tonight the city sleeps under the hush of a king's final rest. You linger in Ravenna, where the air is damp with the scent of pine and marsh water, and silence hangs like a veil over the city. Theodoric's body has been laid to rest in a mausoleum of his own, making a round stone monument crowned by a single massive dome carved from a block so large that later generations wondered how it was ever lifted into place. You step inside the cool air wrapping around you and gaze up at that dome, its weight pressing down like eternity itself. Here lies the Gothic king who never wore an emperor's diadem, yet ruled like one all the same. Ravenna's streets move quietly in the days that follow. Senators dress in solemn togas, their steps heavy as they attend ceremonies. Gothic warriors stand at attention, their spears lowered, their eyes fixed on the ground. Priests chant prayers, their voices echoing against marble walls, mingling Aryan rites with Catholic murmurs in a strange duet of faith. Historians still argue whether Theodoric's death was marked with true unity or only the fragile appearance of it, but the city itself feels hushed, as though holding its breath. There is a curious tidbit told by chroniclers that in his mausoleum, Theodoric's body was originally placed on a throne of purple stone, seated upright, as if still ruling in silence. Imagine walking into that space centuries ago, seeing the great king seated even in death, his heavy cloak folded around him, his eyes closed, but his presence unbroken. Later ages would move his remains, but the image lingers like a shadow in stone. You step outside into Ravenna's basilicas where mosaics shimmer with timeless light. Saints, angels, and emperors gaze down from golden walls, their glass eyes watching centuries flow past. Among them now is Theodoric's legacy, not depicted directly, but felt in the continued rhythm of the city he nurtured. His laws, his patience, his insistence on peace left marks as enduring as these mosaics, even if time eroded his memory. Historians still debate his legacy. Was he a barbarian warlord who borrowed Rome's clothing, or was he the last great heir of Roman order in the West? Some see him as a usurper, others as a preserver. The truth may be that he was both a Gothic king who steadied a fractured land, a ruler who held together two worlds that might otherwise have shattered completely. You wander into the gardens one last time, where figs still ripen on branches and vines climb quietly along walls. The air hums with the same calm he once walked among, and you feel his presence there more than in the stone tomb. His rule, quiet yet firm, lingers in the breath of orchards, in the hum of markets, in the mosaics glowing under candlelight. He may be gone, but his Italy whispers of him still. And so the story of Theodoric, closes not with thunder but with silence, the quiet of stone, of water, of memory. His mausoleum stands in Ravenna to this day, a reminder carved into earth that even in an age of chaos, one man's steady hand could hold back the storm for a time. Now as the tale of Theodoric fades, let the pace soften. Imagine yourself stepping back from Ravenna's mosaics, their golden light dimming like the last embers of a fire. The air grows cooler, each breath slower, as though the whole city is falling gently to sleep. You hear the distant splash of water in the canals, the quiet rustle of leaves in gardens where figs and olives sway softly in the breeze. The rush of armies, the murmur of senators, the whispers of philosophers, all fade into a hush like waves receding from the shore. Picture yourself lying beneath the dome of his mausoleum, its great stone pressing down, not as a burden, but as a blanket of stillness. The stars outside gleam faintly through the night, and you realize how small, yet how peaceful each life becomes in the endless turning of time. Theodoric's doubts, his triumphs, his fears, these too are part of history's gentle murmur, a story now laid to rest. Let your thoughts drift like the waters of Ravenna, carrying you into calm. The world grows quieter with every breath. The lamp beside you flickers low shadows, stretching long until they dissolve completely. There is no need for words now, no need for weight, only the gentle rhythm of rest. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the silence of Theodoric's Italy surround you. In the quiet mosaics of memory and the soft hum of distant gardens, you find yourself safe, calm, and ready to sleep. Sweet dreams are waiting just beyond this breath and beyond the next. Sweet dreams.